Warren, a lot of today's questions referenced risk. It seems to me one of the biggest risks facing us is the pure sovereign debt levels, both here in the U.S. and in many countries in Europe. The liquidity injections by the Fed and more recently the ECB have given us some breathing room. But how do these large debts get balanced, and do they concern you?
Well, and the truth is that the world has seen many, many failures of sovereign debt. I remember when Walt Wriston, back in the early 1980s, said, sovereigns don't default. Well, the truth is they've defaulted, many, many times over history. What happens then is you get a big reallocation of wealth. Now, the wealth doesn't go away. I mean, you don't lose the farms, you lose the plants, you don't lose the people with their skills and all of that sort of thing. There may be some marginal losses, but I don't know how it plays out in Europe. We have seen the ECB here recently give the $1 trillion to banks which are loaded with sovereign debt, which really is questionable in many cases. And I wouldn't be surprised in some cases if they haven't used some of the borrowing to even buy more of it. So it's like giving a guy with a margin account with some perhaps bad assets in it even more money to play with to further leverage themselves up and make an even bigger bet. When they did that at MF or whatever it was, Global, that it had a bad ending, and it might have a bad ending over there. I would much prefer, a world that was getting its fiscal house in order, including in the United States. The counter argument, of course, is that when you're in a recession or close to it, as some or all of Europe might be, that will feed on itself and be destructive in the same way that it was in the early 30s in the United States. But we have been having in the United States, very interesting, we talk about the fact that there was a stimulus bill a few years ago, even though they didn't call it that, and whether it was adequate or inadequate and all that. When the government is operating at a deficit that's 8 to 9% of GDP, that is stimulus on a huge, huge level. You don't call it stimulus. We may not call it, but that is, by definition, huge fiscal stimulus. So we have been having consistent, huge fiscal stimulus in this country, and we will have to wean ourselves off of that fairly soon. And the interesting, I think almost leaders of both parties realize that you probably have to get revenues up to something around 19% of GDP, and you have to get expenses down to 21% of GDP, and that will work fine over time. But you have a situation where both sides feel they will show weakness by going first, and you also have a situation where the leaders, probably of at least one party, can't speak for their party, so that you can't have negotiations in private, which are probably the way to get something like this solved. I would avoid, certainly at these rates, I would totally avoid buying medium-term or long-term government bonds. I think that's the obvious answer, and I wish I had answers that would solve the problem further behind that. But in terms of your own situation, I would stay away from medium or long-term government bonds, our own or those of other countries. Charlie?
Well, of course, he's asking the really intelligent question of the day, and of course we're having difficulty answering it. It is very hard to know how much of this Keynesian stuff will work after you've lost a lot of your fiscal virtue. You come to a time, if you're a government which has pretty much lost all its fiscal virtue, that the Keynesian stuff won't work and the money printing won't work and it's all counterproductive and you're headed for calamity. We don't know the precise point at which it stops working, And somebody like Paul Krugman, who I think is a genius, but I also think he's more optimistic about doing well with various economic tricks after you've lost a lot of fiscal virtue than I think is justified by the facts. I think it's very dangerous to go low on fiscal virtue, and of course, here in the United States, we've used up some of our store, and it's very important that we not go too far in that direction, because we want to be able to do what we did in the Great Recession, where we avoided a huge calamity because we had enough fiscal virtue left so the economic tricks would work. So it's a terrible problem, and I ask you the question, Warren, is it inconceivable that we could get a very mediocre result in the United States as a result of all this trouble?
I think we'll get a good result over time.
I know you do, but is it inconceivable?
Well, we can have problems, but
I'm a little less optimistic than he is. I'm roughly in his position, but I think there's some slight chance that we can get a pretty mediocre result.
Let's say I came to you right now with a budget that made sense in general in what it achieved, that had a 19% revenue built into it and 21% of expenditures. Would you want to adopt that now?
I think the reason intelligent people disagree on this subject is because it's so difficult. Everybody wants fiscal virtue, but not quite yet. They're like that guy who felt that way about sex. He was willing to give it up, but not quite yet. And
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine, yes,
He's a hero to many of us.
I think these are very, very hard questions, and I have one thing I'm sure of, that it is safer if you're going to these deficit financing things to use the money intelligently to build something you're sure to need. That is to just throw it off the end of trains or give it to crooked lawyers. And so I think we all have an interest in making sure that whatever tricks we play are intelligently used, because it will protect our reputation and reality in having this fiscal virtue. So
I'll let you design the 21% that gets expended.
Oh, if I were doing it, I would expend it sensibly on infrastructure that I knew we were going to need, and I would have a massive program, and I would have the whole damn country pay more cheerfully, like we were so many Romans in the Punic Wars. In one of the Punic Wars, the Romans paid off 2/3 of the war debt before the war was over.
That's our campaign slogan, folks. Punic Wars again.
But the answer is, I think we do need more sacrifice. I think we need more patriotism. We need more sensible ways of spending money, and we need more civilized politics.
Do you want to retire early? Do you love freedom? Do you want to work only 1 to 2 hours a day while traveling around the world and spend more time with your family? You can start stock investing and option trading right now. If you want to know more about finance, stocks, options, real estate, crypto, check out our playlist: stock investing, stock trading, option trading, real estate, cryptocurrency.